Walter Benjamin, a prominent figure in cultural studies since the early 1970s, has been a subject of debate and controversy. His seminal essays, The Artist as Producer and The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, were hailed as key contributions to the development of Marxist theories of art and cultural politics. Both writers were known for their committed but unaligned Marxism, which was far removed from that of the official Marxism of communist parties of the 1930s and later of the Stalinist era. Both Benjamin and Brecht recognized the need to extend the role of the intellectual, to engage with the people, and transform existing mass media, while simultaneously making use of their technological advances. Benjamin's statement that the rigid, isolated object of art is of no use whatsoever must be inserted into the context of living social relations was a radical statement, even in the early 1970s, when there was almost no interdisciplinary studies in the humanities in the British university system. In the 1990s, there has been a flicker of renewed interest in Benjamin through a highly circuitous route. There has been a shift away from the foundational vocabulary established in cultural studies in the 1970s and a critique of the assumptions underpinned by Marxism, such as the working class as an emancipatory force, the notion of history as moving inexorably to socialism, the belief in social progress, and the leadership role of the organic intellectual. Instead, there has emerged a much looser, even literary vocabulary. Cultural studies has shown itself able to read across the signs of everyday life without having to restrict itself to the search for pure or perfect meaning. The two terms modernity and postmodernity have been taken up as supplying the framework for this broader context. Benjamin's work can be seen as responding to modernity as it moved towards social catastrophe, and his work can be seen as feeding directly into the documentation of urban modernity. In Germany, there has been a long-standing interest in Walter Benjamin since the late 1960s, with his writings having a significant influence on historiography and the practice of history. His contribution to modern Jewish messianism is also highly valued in both Germany and the USA. A more detailed reconsideration of Benjamin's work is long overdue. He is a model for the practice of being a cultural intellectual, which comprises an inability to conform to the traditional requirements of the scholarly mode. Walter Benjamin's work is a precursor to cultural studies, as it opens up areas that had been ignored as having little cultural value. His essay on Edward Fuchs, the historian and collector, argues that Fuchs's interest in caricature, erotic art, and popular taste led him to develop a language at odds with the official language of art criticism. Benjamin's work reflected on culture as a living historical process, encouraging him to develop a clearer conception of historical materialism as a critical force. In A Small History of Photography, Benjamin introduces major thematics in the analysis of photography in the 1970s, including the destruction of aura due to reproducibility of the image, the challenge of art that photography mounts, and the extent to which it poses the question, not whether it counts as an art, but if art can itself still exist after photography. The close attention to the technology of photography and its effect on the image foreshadows much of Barres's later work. In camera lucida, and the curious, fascinated, and even enchanted tone of the essay proved inspirational to Susan Sontag's On Photography, 1979. Benjamin's refusal to be constrained by the kind of academic mode which insists on conventional scholarship, precise periodization, accumulation of facts, naming, dating, and conferring value, is most important. Instead, Benjamin ruminates on photography, exploring the world of the photograph, suggesting that the photograph connects the past with the present by supplying the pulse and rhythm of historical process. This connection is not linear, contingent, but not without a pattern, momentum, or force that could be challenged or transformed. Many of these ideas are further developed in the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, where the cult of genius and creativity is exposed and the emergence of a mass market for art is celebrated. Benjamin created the possibility of a non-canonic language of cultural criticism, which recognized the urgency of attempting to understand the politics of mass art and mass communication. Benjamin's work, particularly in the 1970s, reveals a deeper connection to the political and social context of the late 1960s. He was politically influenced by the constraints and hypocrisies of bourgeois society, which imposed themselves on the lives of young adults. In this context, the city itself and the public sphere of freedom play a significant role in shaping Benjamin's understanding of modernity. Benjamin's work is seen as a symbol of European modernity in all its complexity, while some argue that the entire edifice of cultural studies was erected around the Eurocentric values of a small number of writers and intellectuals who had no interest in or understanding of their sexual or ethnic subordinates. This should not mean that we expunged their work from our own intellectual history and formation. Susan Buck-Morse's The Dialectics of Seeing, Walter Benjamin and the Arcades Project, 1989, is a reconstruction of Benjamin's ambitious project, the Arcades Project, which aims to be a theory of modernity, philosophy, history, and reflection on the meaning of consumer culture from the viewpoint of memory and experience. The Arcades Project is seen as an incomplete work that has shifted and changed over the years, resembling a diary or record of Benjamin's responses to history, philosophy, modernism, surrealism, and mass culture in the context of Europe on the brink of fascism. Buck-Morse achieves an admirable balance between coherence and looseness. In her reworking of the passage-work material, she maintains the method pioneered by Benjamin, while also extending it into a commentary on contemporary urban life. In the late 1980s, she draws on images, photographs, and other source material, including advertisements, which reflect what Benjamin described then as dialectical images. The dialectics of seeing seeks intellectual resolution in the concepts and ideas found in the passage-work, which the work itself is incapable of providing. Benjamin developed the dialectical image as a means of condensing brief sentences or phrases that simultaneously represent and critique a cultural event or item. This ambition grew out of Benjamin's admiration for montage techniques in the arts and photography, particularly in the work of John Hertfield. Benjamin is not only a cultural theorist and historian, but also a cultural practitioner, creating and practicing a new mode of cultural analysis and criticism. The work's value for cultural studies depends on how we view it. While it may not yield a unified account of modernity, it does exist as a text of modernity, a lengthy, rambling, unedited piece of footage, with a repetitious but compelling voice over. Buck-Morse's compilation document of the passage work takes four main threads: the fossil, the fetish, the wish, image, and the ruin. Part 1 examines the temporal and spatial origins of the passage work project, including the context within which Benjamin embarked on the arcade's work. The book also explores the concept of dialectics in the context of new technology, which he calls the new nature. Benjamin's work explores the concept of dialectics in the context of new technology, which he calls the new nature. This new nature secures old relations while unleashing new ones that are yet unimagined and unincorporated into existing social arrangements. The fourth theme, the ruin, reminds us of the other side of consumer splendor, which is deadly, repetitious, and even hellish in its endless evocation of novelty. The image of the ruin symbolizes the fragility of capitalist consumer culture, as fashion's transitoriness evokes death and decay. Buck-Morse's work on the rock draws on borderless poetry, and Benjamin's work on the Baroque, with the devaluation of the new nature and its status as ruin, becoming instructive politically, as the crumbling of monuments built to signify the immortality of civilization become proof rather of its transiency. Buck-Morse's dream world of mass culture is the final chapter of her argument, which suggests that the Passage work conveys historical experience through dialectical images and montage theory. Benjamin's writing is central to his argument, suggesting that beneath urban modernity, planning, and bureaucracy lies a mythical landscape of chaos and abundance, with new consumer goods taking on the character of ancient, pre-industrial symbols. The mundane objects and extraordinary stars of mass culture were brought together in their unique dream landscapes by the surrealists. Benjamin seeks to use these evanescent objects and images to wake up the masses from their conventional representation. He explains how, with the help of these objects, the collective can empower itself by reconstructing the capacity for experience. There are several potentialities for change, including the return of what technical reproduction takes away, the availability of technically produced images, the uncovering of unconscious images hidden in the structure of consumer culture objects, and the possibility of reading into and from discarded images about the conditions of their historical production. The Dialectics of Seeing is a complex work that explores the importance of the ideologies of history, transmitted through culture and generations, in creating a mystified understanding of contemporary reality. Benjamin proposes that everyday objects of industrial culture, particularly those entering a twilight age, could be rediscovered and rendered useful again in a project of remembering and understanding the dynamics of the moment of their creation. This radical proposal rejects conventional history in favor of a non-linear history, as defined by Bloch as a polyrhythmic and multispatial entity with unmastered corners. Paris Arcades, once considered a precursor to modernity, have been replaced by luxurious department stores and become emblems of an unmastered past moment. Benjamin's work explores the way the present bears traces of the recent past within it, and how popular sentiments are embedded into the materiality of objects that embody the process of historical change. His interest lies not in how great architects, urban planners, and designs combine their imaginative skills with technology and political and ideological power, but rather with a more dispersed, more general structure of feeling that brings a more popular strain, a vernacular. Benjamin provides us with a kind of prehistory of urban modernity through the currency of the commodity. There is a prehistory of urban modernity, which includes a backward, anti-capitalistic impulse. Modernity desperately seeks to deny the presence of volatile and unstable elements by attempting to stifle their memory, by producing more and more objects for more and more people. This aspect, along with the simultaneous rapid change and deadly repetition brought about by modernity, leads Benjamin to describe it as hell. Benjamin's passage and work aims to develop a theory of culture and cultural practice, but the people or masses only possess a metaphorical presence. As L.F.L. knew, Benjamin exists in a depopulated urban landscape where only prostitutes hang out, as they are discarded mass articles. His cultural theory is one of objects rather than social relations, making it difficult to unravel or extend the meaning of the shadowy presence of living people and their utopian impulses in everyday goods and artifacts. Benjamin's approach to consumer culture challenges the grip of bourgeois capitalism and its historical conditions. He describes another mode of enchantment that occurs in and through objects, which can play an active role in the re-enchantment of society through the revolutionary process. Benjamin offers another history of place, space, and culture by reading its objects backwards, such as the Arcades project. By the 1920s and 1930s, arcades existed as exemplary symbols of the ever-changing experience of modernity. Benjamin's distinctive and imaginative mode of argument revolves around the idea of looking back. He insists that we hold the tide of rapid change at bay by looking at the recent past. Instead, his method is to work in and through the dialectical image. He chooses the painting by Paul Klee, titled Angelus Novus, as an opportunity to reflect on the process of historical change. Benjamin's interest in history is of value to cultural studies in the 1990s. He challenges the way in which history is actually done and argues for a sense of recent history to be continually with us in our inhabiting of the present. This requires some effort, because we live in a consumer culture predicated on forgetting or highly selective remembering, e.g., through nostalgia or the heritage industry. The passage and work is a history and documentation of selected items, drawn from the window of urban life, as seen by Benjamin. What characterizes his chosen images is that they have become less visible as a result of their age. However, they are by no means old. The pace of historical change has accelerated as a result of the technological and social changes brought about by this later stage of industrialization. These emblematic goods have been outmoded by the abundance of the new. Benjamin's best work is fueled by a love of culture, collecting cultural items, and urban experiences, not conventionally the subject of academic study. His strands of thinking put him at odds with the left in Germany at the time. For the passage in work to be of use to cultural studies, it would be necessary for those working in cultural studies to remember the value of experimentation, the importance of interdisciplinarity, and the breaking down of the distinctions between philosophy, history, literary criticism, and cultural analysis.